Hello guys, I am back with another episode. There is a message that I want to share with you guys. I received this message a couple of days ago. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation of this message. The message reads like this. Hello my brother, how are you? I am a 50-year-old woman. I am married and I have a large family. I also have my own grandchildren. My story goes like this. My husband was suffering from diabetes, and there was a time where he was declared dead at one of the biggest hospitals in our country. And my brother, the thing that happened on that day, even up until today, I can't even understand it. And ever since my husband was declared to be dead in that hospital where he was admitted into, he died a couple of times, and each and every time when we think that he has died, he will just rise up from the dead again. This is my story in detail. My husband was diagnosed with diabetes. This was in the year 2019, and ever since then, he has been dying and he has been rising up again. Come 2021, my husband became seriously ill, and when we saw that my husband had become seriously ill, we saw that if we kept him in the house, maybe he was going to die. So we took him to the hospital and he was admitted into that hospital for a couple of weeks before he died. Brother Nashi, my husband got sick, and each and every time whenever we would visit him, we will see that my husband is about to die. There was this other day, as usual, me and my children, we went to the hospital where my husband was admitted into, and my husband died during the visiting hours. We were with him in that ward, and as we were speaking with him, that is when I saw that my husband had passed away. We did everything that we do according to our African tradition, the things that we do when one of your loved one has passed away. After we had completed all of those rituals that we were doing on my husband's dead body, we then waited for his corpse to be taken to the mortuary. We were given his clothes that he was wearing when he was admitted into that hospital, so that we can go back home with those clothes. My husband had asked me to bring him his other jacket, so I had gone with that jacket to the hospital. I also took that jacket. We left my husband's corpse lying in that ward, waiting for one of the undertakers to come and take the body to the mortuary. At that time, when my husband had passed away, there was one undertaker who was close by that ward where my husband had just died. He came and he said that he was going to wait for one of his other colleague so that he can help him to prepare my husband's body before they could take him to the hospital's mortuary. After the documentation had been done, that is when me and my children, we drove back home. And as we were driving back home, we had already begun the preparations. We were planning for my husband's funeral. My children called some of their father's relatives. Most of our relatives were also on their way. Brother Nashi, we then got a call a couple of hours later. The call was just simple. We were told that we were supposed to come back to the hospital. When we arrived back at the hospital, after a counseling session, that is when we were taken to the ward. We didn't know what was the meaning of this whole counseling session, but the doctor who was giving us this counseling session, he was a Chinese doctor. When he was counseling us, I didn't expect that my husband had risen from the dead. After that counseling session, that is when that doctor walked with us into another ward. And when we entered into that ward, I nearly collapsed because I was in shock of what I had seen in that ward. When that doctor opened the door, I saw a man who was sitting on that hospital bed. And from his appearance, I immediately knew that this was my husband. And when he turned around to see who it was who had entered into that ward where he was admitted into, I wanted to run away due to shock. I felt that my knees were shaking uncontrollably. I had never expected to see such a thing. I asked that Chinese doctor what was the meaning of this, because as far as I had known, my husband, I had seen him dying. And that doctor then took us into another office because he said that he didn't want to stress out the patient. So we went into another office. Then that Chinese doctor told us that the thing that had happened to my husband, it was a condition that is called the Lazarus syndrome. It happens to a lot of people. I was really shocked, and still I do not believe that this thing is called, and I don't believe in this thing that is called the Lazarus syndrome. I believe that my husband died. I have seen my husband dying a couple of times, and I think that there is black magic behind all of this. I suspect that my husband is a ritualist. After that doctor had told us that the thing that had happened to my husband, it was something that is called the Lazarus syndrome. We then took my husband back home after he was discharged from the hospital because his condition had gotten better. So those undertakers that we had left in that hospital ward where my husband's dead body was lying, when we spoke with them, one of those undertakers said that whilst they were busy going to the mortuary with my husband's corpse, they saw that his corpse was moving around. And when they opened that blanket that they use to cover people who have just died in the hospital, they saw that my husband was breathing. That is when they called the other nurses. From there on, then that Chinese doctor came into the ward. He tried to give us a little bit of counseling, but even up until today, I am still afraid of my husband. I think that I am living with a man who died a long time ago. This thing, Brother Nashi, it keeps on happening. It has happened several times until one of my husband's relatives, my in-law, he came to our house and he spoke with my husband because they were asking my husband if he ever did any rituals. There are these rituals that they do in our country. They say that they take the meat of a tortoise, then they mix it with some herbs. And once you eat that tortoise meat that would have been mixed with other herbs and muti, it means that you will live for a very long time. I think that this is what my husband did. I think that my husband did these rituals when my husband's relatives were speaking with my husband, when they wanted to know if he ever did this kind of a ritual. My husband wanted to speak, but it was as if there was another person who was holding his mouth shut so that he cannot speak. When you look at him, when you look at my husband, whenever they will be asking him if he did any kind of a ritual to prolong his life, you can see that there is something that he wants to say, but there will be another spirit that will be forcing him not to speak. My husband is suffering. He is very sick. We have reached a point in our lives whereby we are just saying, please, God, can you take my husband's soul so that he can rest in peace? My husband has suffered, Brother Nashi. My husband has died a couple of times, but he has managed to come back to the land of the living. How he has been doing this, I do not even know. All that I know is that my husband is suffering. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received from one of our listeners. Then I had to ask one of our admins to give us a translation. Let us thank our admin who is in China who gave us this translation, hoping that the story was not lost in translation. I'll be back with another episode.